Welcome to the Appleseed, where we bring you and your family great stories from great storytellers. On today's episode, we'll hear from Angela Lloyd.
He said, "Do you have a trouble? Do you have a sorrow in your heart?"
And Paul Strickland.
And Aunt Drew and Uncle Faltz are without question the two wisest family members I have ever made up.
I'm your host, Sam Payne, and today's stories are all about one aspect or another of seeking happiness. First, we'll hear from Angela Lloyd, who comes to us from Southern California. She'll tell a whimsical story called The Ragged Peddler. Now, Angela often plays unusual instruments in her stories, and in this one, she plays a circle of bells as they spin around on a frame. And for different effects in playing this instrument, sometimes she plays the ringing bells themselves, and sometimes she clatters a stick along the framework upon which the bells spin. And you'll hear those sound effects as this story goes by. Here's Angela's performance. We recorded it live in the Appleseed studio.
Once upon a time, there was a village, a town, a suburb, a cul-de-sac, where everyone was miserable. They complained about their lives. They were so dissatisfied with their lives and their work. And the worst thing was their village was so far away from others that the peddlers who traveled from one place to another, they hardly ever stopped there. And when they did, the things they brought were useless and ridiculous. Well, the worst thing that had happened in that place was the children had become infected with their parents' discontent. They would lay out on the summer streets when it was really hot, and every now and then they'd roll over and say, "What are we going to do now, boys?" Well, one day, in that place, they heard a new sound. And the people raised their gaze from their work and looked out, and here on the road coming into their town, they saw a ragged peddler. He had holes in his hat. His shoes were flapping open in the dust, and his vest was looking for its lost buttons. Holes in his pants, holes in his shirt, holes in his hat with his hair sticking out. But there was a basket on his shoulder, and that was promising. Everybody gathered round. They said, "What have you got to sell? It better be cheap." The peddler snapped his fingers, and the basket jumped to the ground. He said, "I sell happiness." And everybody said, "We don't want any." And then he snapped his fingers, and the basket turned itself right side up, and everyone leaned in, and they said, "It's empty. It's empty." A boy close to the peddler, he said, "What's that colored rope around your waist for?" And he untucked the end of it, and he handed it to him, and the boy pulled on it, as every boy should do, can do, ought to do, and that peddler started spinning. You couldn't even see him anymore, just a whir of color. And that rope flew up over everyone's heads and tied itself to a tree right there in town, and then danced over everyone's heads and tied itself to the only other tree in town, and it was exactly long enough. Everybody said, "Nice." The peddler said, "My shop is open." And everyone looked at each other. He said, "Do you have a trouble? Do you have a sorrow in your heart? Do you have a monkey on your back? Do you have something in your pocket or something in your ear saying, nya, 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 nya? Whatever it is, come on forward and put it in the basket. Come on in. Put it in the basket. One of the boys looked at him and said, I bet you don't take your hat off very often. And he took his hat off and put it back on, and the hair found its way right back through the same holes. The kids went, nice! But no one would come forward until a boy with a flat tire for his bicycle stepped forward, and his father had been promising to fix it for weeks. He pushed it in the basket, and he said, I have a flat tire. A widow with 2 daughters stepped forward and dropped in an empty coin purse. The tailor with wild red hair, always hiding it under a hat, he dropped in his hat. A woman, fingers so stiff with arthritis, she just dropped in a ball of yarn. And the teacher, convinced there was no such thing as time anymore, took off her watch and dropped it in the basket. Everybody had something. Everybody had something. And then, when they stepped back, the peddler stepped forward and he snapped his fingers, and the basket flew up in the air and rolled everything and hung everything out on the line. And then he said, now my shop is open. Come forward and take from the line the smallest trouble that you see. From me to you today, it's free. Then they stepped forward, and they were looking like they were in a museum, really looking. And every now and then they would reach up, take something down, and then after a while, everybody had something in their hands. And there was a aha, because everybody had taken back what they had put in. Every now and then they'd heard the peddler say, take from the line the smallest trouble that you see. From me to you today, it's free. The peddler snapped his fingers. The rope untied itself, wrapped around his waist. He snapped his fingers again. The basket jumped up on his shoulder, and he started to walk out of town. The boys chased after him. They were saying, hey, mister, stay. Stay for supper. You're fun. Take your hat off again. And he disappeared once he got down that road. Well, the people started turning to each other, and a woman came up to the widow and said, bring your daughters to my house tonight. Come for supper. The tailor was putting on his hat when a woman who had dropped in her empty locket walked up to him and said, Tailor, don't put your hat on so fast. Everybody was turning and talking to each other. The people in that place did not live happily ever after. They lived happier than ever before. And there were days when they were at work and they thought they heard the peddler's bells, and they would look up, and a boy would look at his father and say, Dad, what are you looking at? And again, the story would unfold. Some luck lies in not getting what you thought you wanted, but getting what you have, which once you have it, you may be smart enough to see is what you would have wanted had you known.
Angela Lloyd with The Ragged Peddler. And Angela's story makes me think of something from my own life. And I'll tell you what it is. It seems like every place I've ever visited, I spend at least a few moments wishing I could live there. The beauty of the place, the delicious food in its restaurants, the kindness of the people who live and work there, it all takes me completely by surprise just about everywhere I go. And I imagine myself living there. I long for it, even. A few weeks ago, my wife and daughter and I visited friends in a little town in Ohio. Their home stood on acres and acres of grass and trees. A little lane took them downtown, which was filled with bookstores and artists' cooperatives and a historic old theater that had a real theater ghost in it. Rolling green hills covered in thick woods surrounded the place, and I thought, let's never leave. Let's find a home we like right here and live here forever. Not long before that, my wife and daughter and I visited New Mexico. We drove on dirt roads to ancient ruins and curled up by the fire at night in the inn where we stayed and read books. We visited antique shops and ate hamburgers with green chilies on them and took walks alongside a river. And I thought, let's never leave. Let's find a home we like right here and live here forever. Sometime before that, my wife and daughter and I visited the Oregon coast, and we marveled at the surf-pounding Cape Perpetua and saw caves full of sea lions and found weathered glass on the beach and visited lighthouses and ate fish and chips that changed our lives. And I thought, let's never leave. Let's find a home we like right here and live here forever. Well, why haven't my wife and daughter and I moved to any of those places? Well, between visits, we come home, and we see our house with our comfortable beds and the tall, rocky mountains rising up on the east side of our neighborhood, and our friends and our cats welcome us home. And I think, let's never leave. There's a home we like right here. Let's live here forever. There are so many wonderful places in the world to be. I'm glad of an occasional reminder of the wonderful place where I am. And that's where Angela's story took me. Where will it take you? And who will you take along?
Lively conversation is guaranteed when we listen to stories on the Apple Seed.
There's a lot coming up, but I want to take just a moment and tell you about another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's called The Lisa Show. Now, life can be stressful, but Lisa Valentine Clark, the host of The Lisa Show, along with her guests and her unique council of moms, provide a positive and empowering look at all kinds of challenges. They tackle them head on, sharing experiences, offering suggestions on how we can handle relationships and health and technology and body image and family, all kinds of stuff. And Lisa is a great person to hang out with. The Lisa Show, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all kinds of ways to listen to The Lisa Show whenever you like. The Lisa Show from BYU Radio.
Simultaneously laughing, we're all agreed that we love, love, love the Apple Seed.
It's a pleasure to be with you today, and we're pleased to introduce our next story, one told by Paul Strickland. Paul's offbeat style and surprising humor may just reveal a thing or two about seeking happiness, and you're sure to have a lot of fun along the way. Here's the Eulogy of Melvin V. Odroit, recorded live in the Appleseed studio.
So I like to tell all different kinds of stories, and this particular genre of story that I'm about to tell, it is one that it doesn't get told as often as you would think it does, which is weird because it's the only type of story I know of that people are dying to hear. It's a eulogy. Here's what happened. I went down to visit my Aunt True and my Uncle Faltz. For those of you who do not know, my Aunt True and Uncle Faltz live in a trailer park called Big Fib Trailer Park Cul-de-sac. It's a trailer park in the shape of a giant cul-de-sac in a town called Big Fib. And Big Fib is a very different town than the one I was born in. I was born in a small Alabama town called Pensacola, Florida. And Big Fib Trailer Park Cul-de-sac is a very different trailer park than the trailer park I factually grew up in. And Aunt True and Uncle False are without question the two wisest family members I have ever made up. Now, I love going down there to collect stories from them, so I was down there just hanging out with them for 3 nights. And on the third night while I was there, they lived like 4 trailers in to the cul-de-sac, but on the far side, one of the old-timers died. Now, I never met that man. So I just thought the best thing I could do was go ahead and pack up my things and drive away and let them as a community mourn for their loved one. So I drove away. You can imagine my surprise then, 3 days later, when Uncle False called me on the phone, asked me if I would write that man's eulogy. Said that since I didn't know him, I would be unbiased. Which, under the circumstances, I thought maybe he mispronounced unqualified, but no. Uncle False said, listen here, boy, we all knew him. So we all know what we would say about him. You understand? Over the years, we said plenty about him. I mean, he lived a long time and talked for all of it. So we just want to hear a few stories about the man we ain't already heard 17 dozen times already. Also, I don't know if you can smell what I'm putting down here or not, boy, but we didn't like him much. So when you are writing this eulogy, sprinkle in some not so nice things in there. And then just resolve it good at the end. Because they ain't nothing worse, son. They ain't nothing worse than folk who were nicer to people in death than they were in life. So, to honor the wishes of Uncle False and Ain't True, without any further research, I present to you this eulogy. A celebration of the made-up life of Melvin V. Odroit. Melvin Vernon Odroit, until his final day, considered himself an innovator. He was the kind of fellow that succeeded at nothing except for happiness. He failed at everything except for happiness. And he wasn't lazy. You need to understand, he meticulously crafted every single one of those failures. And for that reason, I will always have nothing but undying respect for the man his friends called Mel Odroit. Born and raised in Thousand Sticks, Kentucky, Melvin Vernon Odroit grew up hearing his mother's mantra. Virtually every day she would say, if you want to be an innovator, son, you got to do things in a way no one's ever done them before. Well, Mel heard his mother's mantra. But we've all had this experience in our lives where you'll hear something for a couple of years or for decades sometimes before it hits you what it actually means. Melvin heard his mother's mantra every day, but he never seemed to take in the crucial fact that, y'all, innovators are supposed to improve things. Let me give you an example. Whittling. Mel took up whittling at the age of 16, and townsfolk thought this was a lovely idea. The image in their head of this lanky young man in an oversized flannel, sitting in a rocking chair, dulling his knife, trying to make something out of nothing. Listen to that. Dulling your knife, trying to make something out of nothing. Townsfolk thought that sounded like a beautiful metaphor for a young person's life. Dulling your knife, trying to make something out of nothing. Townsfolk thought that whittling would keep Mel busy. They were correct. Townsfolk thought that whittling would keep Mel out of trouble. Nope. Because Mel was an innovator first. He wasn't just a normal whittler. He was an innovative whittler. He didn't take a log and then whittle it into a wooden horse. He didn't take a log and whittle it into a wooden whistle. No. He took a log, whittled it into a small pile of shavings, and then gave the pile of shavings a title. Because he thought it was modern art. The first one he made, he called it, "Whittle Me This." People thought that was cute. He started raising eyebrows all around town whenever he made a pretentiously large pile and called it, "This is how much a woodchuck could." There's a beautiful photo of Mel sitting in a giant pile of shavings that had very recently been his rocking chair. The Great Dust Storm of 1946 began as the First Baptist Church's front porch. People got concerned. And how could they not have been concerned? I mean, hand railings, y'all, and park benches just started disappearing left and right, just turned into modern ephemeral art that took flight on the wind, and the City Hall building was made of pine. The town council and the mayor got together secretly one night. They had a vote, and that is how, in the town of Thousand Sticks, Kentucky, whittling became a felony. Mel and his mama decided they should leave town, so they left their half-carved-up home behind, and they headed north. I wish we had time in this eulogy to discuss Mel's young adulthood, some of the exploits he got into in his life, but we don't have time for that. I want to talk about later on in his life when he met a wonderful woman named Ima, and they settled into their lives together as pig farmers. This was right in the era, right before all of y'all met him in Big Fib Trailer Park cul-de-sac. Now, most of y'all know that Mel and Ima Odroit were famous pig farmers, because Mel and Ima Odroit famously added so many phrases to the pig farming lexicon. You all know that. So let's talk about a couple things maybe not everybody knows. Mel and Ima Odroit's farmhouse was built right on top of the time zone line, which a lot of people thought was wild. Like, what a terrible idea. One room in a different time zone than another room. It would get so confusing. It was perfect for them because Ima would go out tending to the pigs, and she'd stay out so late that she'd come home late for the dinner that Mel had made for them. But it was fine because the dining room was an hour behind the kitchen, which meant the food always stayed hot an extra 60 minutes. They lived in that house happily for 40 years. Here's another misconception. We always say Mel and Ima Odroit. Mel and Ima Odroit were famous pig farmers. Now, Ima was a great pig farmer. She had one flaw as a pig farmer, and that was it. Mel had nothing but flaws as a pig farmer. The truth is, Mel was just kind of bored. I mean, as is often the case in our lives, we have a tendency to replace old habits with new vices. And this is what Mel did. Mel gave up whittling a long time ago, right? But he did this terrible thing. He took up small-time gambling, which is a bad idea now, but it was a terrible idea back then, because back then, most states had banned dice and cards. So there were all these dangerous, weird, underground, rural gambling rings that had cropped up around thumb wrestling and rock, paper, scissors and the floating arm trick. We all know what the floating arm trick is. The floating arm trick is like children play it now, where they'll stand in a small doorway. They'll press their arms out against the doorway for 60 seconds. They'll count to 60. They step out of the doorway, relax their arms, and their arms rise against their will. Yeah, they don't play it in Vegas anymore. But the point is, Mel would get together with his farmer friends on a Saturday night. And one of them would stand in a small doorway and press his arms out against the doorway, while the rest of the farmers would all sit in a circle, and they would count to 60 while they bet quarters on how high that farmer's arms would rise against his will before he regained control of his arms. Yeah, it's a terrible idea. Mel was very good at the game, though. He had heavy hands. Also, he was just lucky, and he would have to be to get through his life the way he was. He was lucky. He just always walking around with his pockets bulging full of those surreptitious, clandestine floating arm trick quarters. Ima's one flaw that I mentioned earlier. Winters. Every winter, Ima and Mel lost 10% or more of their pigs. Every winter, either to frostbite or the pigs suffered from swine seasonal affective disorder. Every winter, they just lost 10% or more of their pigs, and they did not know what to do. And at one point, Ima turned to Mel and said, well, do you have an idea? And Mel said, yeah, I got an idea. I'm an innovator. Stack them. Stack them, one right on top of another. That was his idea. Stacking the pigs. The idea being that the body heat of the pig beneath and above would keep the pig stack warm all winter long. And it worked. They didn't lose a single pig that entire winter. They had stacks of 11. They had hundreds of pigs in stacks of 11 all over their fields. Just hundreds of pigs. You put a 12th one up there, you can get a leaning tower of pigs, and it upsets the neighbors. But hundreds of pigs, stacks of 11 all over the fields, and they didn't lose a single pig all winter until spring sprung. Now, when spring sprung, of course, it came time to unstack the pigs. Y'all, you would think with all of that floating arm trick that Mel had played in his life, You would think with those years of playing floating arm trick, Mel would have realized you cannot wait an entire season, an entire winter, and then unstack the top 9 pigs off of those bottom 2 pigs and not expect those bottom 2 pigs to just float off into the sky, just like your arms do. Poor Mel and Ima Odroit were just standing there just watching their bottom 2 pigs float off into the sky. The pigs were just going, ay, 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 ay. That's the noise that pigs make when pigs fly. They go oink on the ground. They go, ay, 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 whenever they fly. And of course, we all know they go, wee, 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 all the way home. They were flummoxed, Mel and Ima. They had no idea what to do. That was the horrible spring morning, though, that they coined the terms piggyback ride and when pigs fly, and also, unfortunately, hog heaven. They lost so many pigs. They tried everything to weigh them down. They tried everything. Mel, at one point, you know how the term piggy bank was coined? Mel went home, got all of those surreptitious, clandestine floating arm trick quarters, brought them back, started feeding them to the bottom 2 pigs to try to weigh them down. Yeah, but guess what, y'all? Money can't solve all your problems. It was Ima who realized the solution to this problem. It was Ima who realized the solution to every problem in their lives, let's just face it. Ima was the one who said, if we want to keep our pigs warm all winter long, what we got to do is put a pig in a blanket. She copyrighted the term, and Mel and Ima lived off the modest residuals of mediocre dinner parties for years and years and years and years and years and years to come. Sweet Ima Odroit died suddenly in 2003. It was a surprise. She was in great health. Mel had gone out to water the pigs. He came back inside, and he just found Ima dead on the kitchen floor. So he thought fast, and he dragged her body into the dining room because in that time zone, Ima wasn't dead yet. Her eyes popped open. And the couple who had spent 40 years living and working together got 46 extra minutes to say goodbye. Mel took her outside. They laughed and they cried. They held hands and they told each other stories while Mel sat on her the entire time, which I know sounds weird. But listen, this is the story that taught me to absolutely never judge the way anybody deals with death. Because when Ima's time came, 46 minutes later, when Ima's time came, Mel simply stood up. And Mel said that's the last he ever saw of her. I know my death will not be nearly as magnificent as Ima Odroit's. But y'all, I hope when I go, I feel that loved. Melvin was heartbroken. And he sold the farm and all the pigs, and he moved to Big Fib Trailer Park cul-de-sac, which is where y'all know him from. He died recently with a smile on his face, having lived a beautiful, unique, weird, singular, interesting existence. He's the kind of fellow that succeeded at nothing except for happiness. He failed at everything except for happiness. And for whatever reason, most of us just do not aspire to live that way. But Melvin Vernon Odroit was always an innovator.
Paul Strickland with his story, The Eulogy of Melvin V. Odroit. Now, I may not know the secret to happiness, but I do think it might have something to do with feeling that loved. And of course, with sharing stories. A big thank you to Angela Lloyd and Paul Strickland for joining us today. We hope you'll share stories about what makes you happy with those you love. Because at the Appleseed, we believe that sharing and listening to great stories can change your family's world.
The Appleseed is produced by Wendy Folsom,
Sam Payne,
and Brian Tanner.
Our audio engineers are Ashton Parkinson
and Carly Wilson.
The rest of the Appleseed team is Kelly Wehrmeister,
Trent Horton,
Evadane Hendricks,
Miriam Icy,
and Tristan Schetzel.
A special thanks to the subscribers of our podcast who rate us or leave reviews.
You help people find the show.
We also love to receive emails at theappleseed@byu.edu.
Your thoughts and comments help us to shape the future of the Appleseed.
We're pleased and proud to be among the many podcasts produced by the BYU Radio family.
And you can find episodes of The Appleseed wherever podcasts are found, on the BYU Radio app or at byuradio.org/Appleseed.
I'm Sam Payne, and the whole team can't wait to be with you again on The Appleseed.